Great to see you here. This is a new video offered to you by the Ceuster Academy. My name is Luc de Ceuster and I'm the founder of the Ceuster Academy. In this video, I will talk about examples of risks and importance of risk management. But before we start, don't forget to click on the subscribe button, click on the bell button, and every time we have a new video, YouTube will inform you about it. So let's have a look what we will talk about. First of all, we look at some risks that happened, and we're typically looking at things that go wrong. And the first disaster is what we call Galloping Gerty, and also I refer to the bridge over the river Kwai. But the thing is about Galloping Gerty, which is the Tacoma Narrows suspension bridge, which was an important development in the US because the bridge collapsed, like you can see on the pictures. Now, the bridge is similar to the Golden Gate and other suspension bridges, but something happened here. And we call that typically aeroelasticity, where the wind creates what we call flutter. And the movements is a kind of resonance. And basically at the end, the structure completely breaks down. Like we see here, you can find a lot of interesting YouTube videos about this. A second element that I want to talk about is the Havilland DH 106 Comet, which at the time was one of the best pressurized airplanes in the world. It was competing with the Boeing 707, but something happened, and this thing that happened here, as you can see in the picture, are in fact fractions due to fatigue, and basically metal fatigue created cracks that started from the windows, and the airplane typically disintegrated in mid-air. They found it out later. They remediated, but unfortunately the loss was there. On the other hand, it was also an opportunity because from that moment on, European airplane constructors came together to create what we call today the company Airbus. And it's still a very big success, competing with Boeing and other companies. Also, Tenerife North airplane of Tenerife, where two Boeing 747 crashed into each other on the runway due to a misunderstanding of the problem or the word clearance at the time. Clearance was used for almost everything. Clearance to taxi, clearance to start engines, clearing to take off. And the Dutch captain interpreted the permission, the clearance wrongly. They took off and they hit a Boeing 747 that was still on the runway. Now they changed this. They changed the procedure, so today clearance is only used for takeoff. There is no misunderstanding anymore. Sydney Opera House, we cannot imagine Sydney without it, but basically it started as a kind of disaster. A lot of problems around this wonderful building that we see today. There are a lot of books that have been written about it. It took a lot longer than that was expected. It was a lot more expensive, and basically when you compare the surface for opera and the cost, is one of the most the most expensive opera houses in the world. The Alamo, remember the Alamo, we know this about the American history, where some people were defending the settlement in the Alamo. They were waiting for troops to come, but basically it didn't happen. It was a risk they took. They didn't get the support, and it's a very big lesson that when you don't have the support, nothing works. On the other hand, this was basically the trigger for creating the state of Texas. Battle of the Bulge, those who remember the history of the Second World War, around Christmas time in late December, the Germans did some very last big offensive to go to the port of Antwerp. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but at the time, the American troops were in fact locked in Bastogne or around Bastogne. It's also called or remembered as Nuts City, where in fact the Germans came to offer a surrender for the American troops, and the commander sent the message nuts. Basically, the Germans didn't understand what it meant at the time, but basically saying, we don't want to surrender. They kept on fighting, and the total project of the, let's say, the counteroffensive by the Germans went bad because they didn't have petrol, they didn't have the necessary support. And once the weather was better, the Allies could, in fact, attack and support the ground troops. It was a very important moment at the end of the Second World War. We also have in Belgium a lot of World War I battlefields. When you are building, you can still find a lot of ammunition there, also some soldiers that are still buried in earth, and it can have a very large impact on your projects. It's very important to understand what these risks are. And when we were working in the military construction area everywhere in Belgium, we had certainly on military terrain, we had the responsibility to warn the people about ammunitions, about all these possible risks that could be there. And it was included in the contract. So when you're doing the work there in those areas, you know that something can be found and that you will have some consequences for that. The same with archaeological sites. They can lead to enormous project delays. Some companies had this disadvantage, this problem, and companies can basically go bankrupt for it. What we do, or what we did in the last years in Belgium, was to investigate the grounds before starting the work, so we could do an archaeological cleanup. But in some cases you find things that you didn't expect, and then suddenly it creates a problem. Recently in 2021, if you would be watching this video later, they found old German bunkers in Holland where they didn't expect it. So basically you start with your job, you start digging, and suddenly there are those old structures that everybody forgot about. Now we talk about risks, but at this moment we were looking at risks in a negative sense. And we also have to look at risks in an opportunity sense, positive risk events. And that's one of the things that's important. And one of the elements I want to mention are about opportunities. Missed opportunities, if you don't look at the possibilities. Now, you may miss very interesting opportunities. What you do with it. Kodak, we still know the Kodak moment. We talk about Kodak as being the first company really bringing photography to the people with their little box cameras. They made their simple cameras so they could sell their films, like some printer manufacturers are doing. Basically, they sell a very cheap printer so that you keep on buying the refills. Now, this was one of the mistakes. Kodak at the time was only focusing on films. And this man, now he's famous, he's holding the first digital camera. It's not what you've seen today. You see a cassette recorder to store the video images, a lot of electronics, but it was basically the first camera, and they told him to put it away, don't look at it, just we want to keep on making films. And basically that's what's happening. It's also the same thing when I see colleagues today who still want to teach in the classical way in front of the class, but the world changed. COVID pushed us into a more online world, and when you don't follow the trends, you will have your Kodak moment, but the wrong Kodak moment, or you will have your Waterloo, like sometimes people refer to Napoleon Bonaparte when he had the Battle of Waterloo. It would also be a very interesting example of threat and what happened there. Now, another thing, it's more about military, but also Second World War, invasion of the Americans or the Allied forces into Europe, trying to destroy the the German army. Now, one of the biggest problems was crossing rivers at the time. And what you have to do is to get to the other side of the river, build a bridgehead so you can bring in more troops, which has to be done by boats under enemy fire. And at Remagen, the American troops came there. The bridge exploded, but it remained intact. Not intact to pass, in fact, troops with trucks and tanks, but they could go over and they could establish a bridgehead on the other side of the river, which was an enormous help to, let's say, to finish the Second World War. So these are opportunities. People come here, you go there, you take the opportunity, or you don't take it like Kodak did. So basically, why is risk management important? Well, we have to see what can happen. Many of the risks that were there could be avoided or reduced. We can take measures about them. Of course, when we have opportunities, we want to increase their occurrence. Now, the understanding the solution or the circumstances will help you to improve your project. Take into account risk management elements, risks, and evaluate what you can do about it and avoid negative risk events and provide ways to enhance or to use positive risk events. Opportunities, like I said before, you can change the game if you take into account those opportunities. On the other hand, you have to adjust the level of risk management to the size and importance of the project. You have to understand that spending too much money on risk is as bad as spending too little. And when you have large projects which are quite safe, your level of risk management does not have to be so high. On the other hand, when you have a small project where you have a very high level of risk, you may invest more money into risk management. Now, the problem is that many companies still today don't consider risk management properly. It leads to losses, it leads to unsuccessful projects, loss of reputation, and a lot of discussions. Talking about risk with your team, with the sponsor, with the stakeholders is very important and could increase your project success. Warning people about things that can go wrong and offering solutions to deal with it is very important. The same for identifying opportunities. You find an opportunity, you have processes in place to deal with it, and it can also increase the value of your project. So that was it about the introduction related to risk management. There are a lot of things that we will talk about in risk management, but like always, don't forget to click on the subscribe button, click on the bell button, and every time we have a new video, YouTube will inform you about it. Thank you very much and bye-bye.